All right, good evening. It's a couple minutes after 5 o'clock, so we want to go ahead and get started. We've got our second phase of our Generation Seminar after our devotional period here in just a moment. John's going to lead us in a couple of songs. If you'd like to, take a Bible and open up to Proverbs chapter 26. Our devotional thought tonight will come from Proverbs chapter 26. Interesting little bit of miscellany for us to consider, and a verse from Proverbs. At this time, I will make the announcement. I got two announcements as we begin. First, we're going to start with a prayer in just a moment, and I'm especially going to mention in that prayer Christina. A lot of us know her. She's been coming back and forth with either folks from the children's home or with Deirdre Mansell. Been here for a couple of years. Many of us know Christina. She is missing at this time after sometime during worship this morning when they were at worship services, and we don't have a lot of information to go on right now. We just know that we're really concerned about her and that situation, and we wanted to be praying for that. We don't have, again, a lot of information to talk about, but we also wanted to ask anybody here gets any communication, text messages, phone calls, or anything like that from her, if you could let myself, one of the elders, or someone from the children's home know that. We're working on solving that situation as quickly as we can. So we're going to pray about that here in just a moment. After the prayer, John will come up, lead us in a song before the devotional thought. If you're here tonight and you need to take the Lord's Supper, you need to take the Lord's Supper, while we sing the first song, if you could make your way out this door to my right, your left, and go into the first classroom on the left, they will serve you the Lord's Supper tonight. So let's begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll sing. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for being a God that we can turn to, for being with us and guiding us and loving us. As we talk this morning about how you provide for us, we come to you tonight with a special prayer on behalf of one that we care about, and we are concerned for Christina at this time and her health and safety, and we ask you to watch over her in a very particular way tonight while she is out of our range of knowledge and ability. Help us to continue to be vigilant and to do what we can, but also we know that we need your help in this situation, and we ask you to give it to us. Protect her. Help us as we try to make good decisions, that we would be protected as well, and that you would stand by us in our times of need. Help us to be the kind of people that you want us to be. Help us to be that city set on a hill, so that we can shine like stars in the night sky. Forgive us when we fall, and give us the strength to stand and try again. We offer this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. You need to take the Lord's Supper. If you'll exit at this time while John comes to lead us.
Number 904, 904, Have You Been to Jesus? If you would like to mark that song number, it'll be the song of invitation, 904. Then before, we'll sing 291, 291, the great physician, 291. Let's sing verses 1, 2, and 4, please, of this song. Let's sing. The great physician now is here, the sympathize in Jesus, in things that truly heart, which will hear the voice of Jesus. Sing his song and sing a song. Sing his name on mortal tongue. Sing his everlasting song. Jesus, blessed Jesus. All glory to the dying Lamb. I now believe in Jesus. I love the blessed Savior's name. I love the name of Jesus. Sing his
You know that I like stories about dumb criminals. Those always humor me a little bit. I don't know necessarily if this falls into that category specifically, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. I thought I'd bring it up. There is a jail that is still in existence today. It's called the Lower Lake Jail. It's in California. It was finished in 1876. Tiny one-room jail made out of stone. And it was built by a pair of brothers, John and Theodore Copsey. And they finished it in 1876. Interestingly enough, when they finished building the prison, they celebrated at the local saloon and got a little bit too drunk and became the first inmates of the prison that they had built. Rumor has it that they forgot to secure the roof in place, and that night they became the first prisoners to escape from the jail as well. I thought that was an interesting. It reminded me of some of the words in Proverbs chapter 26. Down near the end of the chapter in verse 27, it says, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and a stone will come back on him who starts it rolling." Or in Proverbs chapter 28 in verse number 10, a similar kind of concept, "Whoever misleads the upright into an evil way will fall into his own pit, but the blameless will have a godly inheritance." And this story may not be exactly what the writer of Proverbs has in mind when he talks about falling into your own trap. But I think we do have to think about the consequences of our actions. Sometimes we may be unaware of what consequences are waiting for us based on what we've done, but they can catch up to us in the most unlikely of ways. Tonight we're going to offer the invitation song. If you find yourselves caught in a trap, if you've painted yourself into a corner, you may not be able to get yourself out of that, but we serve a God who can help us take care of those problems if we're willing to face up to them and do what's necessary. And so we're going to sing this invitation song right now, give anyone who needs the opportunity to come forward as we stand together and as we sing.
Have you been to Jesus? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His graces? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are you gone spotless, are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? With the bridegroom cometh, will your robes be white, new and white in the blood of the Lamb? Will your soul be ready for the vengeance right? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless, are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? You see,
just a few announcements before we begin our panel tonight. Good to have you back again with us, Michael. Thank you for being here. We have a good number. We had a good number this morning. If you're visiting with us, we're always honored that we have visitors. We want to encourage you to come back and be with us Wednesday night as we meet at 7 and on Sunday morning at 9 and at 10. I want to remind you of a few things. Elders, deacons, preachers, men's meeting following our service tonight. Please stay a few minutes so that you can be informed of all the different things that are going on. Ladies' prayer meeting Tuesday night at our house. Marcia will be hosting that. And please remember all those on our list that are sick. I want to run through these. Susan Brown will be having some more surgery tomorrow. I want to continue to remember Dwayne Fulmer, Ruby Hambat, Lyndon Jackson, Leanne May, Carl Moore, Ted Pounders, Bob Parks, Margie Underwood, all those of our number, and others, Mark Alexander, Bill Dayton, Barry Dickerson, Cole Kelly, Regina McNabb, Ellen Reynolds, Richie Reisner, Paul Smith, Don Williams. And we want to continue to remember Kenneth Rogers. I hope a lot of you got to see Kenneth this morning as he was here getting ready for some treatments and some further tests. Please remember him in your prayers. Thank you for being patient with us during our remodeling. We've got some people that are working really, really hard on this. They're volunteering their time. We're waiting on contractors on some other things. We know it's not as light in here as it needs to be. We're working on that. We hope to have that took care of by Wednesday night or Sunday. But we appreciate what they are doing. If you have any questions, please see myself, Lewis, Bob, Jim, or Gary, and address those to us if you have any questions at all. Thank you again for being here tonight. All those that are going to classes, you're dismissed at this time to go to classes.
Like it normally is. And tonight we've got our 7th grade and up in here, and we're going to, again, part 2 of our Generation Seminar. We've got 5 folks. I do have 5 folks to fill out our panel tonight. Had to do some quick adjustments to make that happen, but we've got a time. Michael will call for you guys, ladies, to come up here. Do want to take just a quick second to remind us while the handouts are being passed out. Our worship portion has concluded. Obviously, this is not part of our worship time together. We're not having we're not doing a choir or a praise team or anything like that up here. This is just discussion, kind of like in Bible class a little bit. Michael's in charge. He's the boss. And so there's no usurping going on if that's a question that's on your mind, if that's a vocabulary word that you're worried about. So I'm going to turn things over to him. We'll keep passing these out, and he will let our 5 panelists know when to come up here and take a seat at the table.
Good evening, Petersville. In a surprise turn of events, I am back with you for the 2nd week. They did not tell me I could not come back, so I'm excited to be with you. Each week I've been sharing, I've only been 1 week so far, but I've been sharing with you a little story about my name. Last week I shared with you an old CYC story. This week I thought I'd tell you about the first youth event I ever put on at Winfield. Do you guys have these things called 5th quarters here in the Petersville community? Well, we do. It's after the football game where you'll invite everybody to come out to your church building and have some food. Well, this was my first event at Winfield, and I was really excited about it, and so I was trying to figure out what to do for food. So I decided I'm going to call McDonald's. So I called McDonald's, and I said, I've got this event Friday night. There's going to be a lot of people there. I need 60 cheeseburgers for Friday night. And the lady said, okay, that sounds good. No problem. What time do you need them? Et cetera, et cetera. And we worked through all that. And then she said, what name do I put it under? I said, Michael Jackson. Click. She hung up on me. I had to call back. And I learned from that point forward never to use my personal name, always to use the church name. I enjoy laughing and sharing stories about my name and stories about my life, and I know you do too, because we learn that stories are the way that we communicate with one another. Sharing stories is a language that crosses all different generational boundaries, and stories allow us to be better connected with one another. And it's the same thing throughout our workshop, that stories are the way that we come into contact with one another and begin to understand one another. And really the greatest challenge of these workshops as we go throughout the next several weeks is going to be learning how to listen to one another. And what I've found so fascinating as I've gone throughout the workshops in the past is that we don't take a lot of opportunities to do what we're going to be doing over the next several weeks, just to sit and listen to one another. And I've found that it has a profound effect on the churches who take the time to do it. So I'm confident it's going to have the same effect here. Remember last week we learned that there are now 5 different generations in the church and in our workplaces and in our families. It's the first time in history that that has ever happened. We learned the names of the 5 generations: traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z. We also learned from our little trivia game that we sometimes don't even speak the same language. And we have a hard time knowing what each other is thinking when it comes to generational differences. And so remember that statement I made last week, that if you think there are unspoken rules running through everyone's head whenever you're making a decision or you're talking about things at church, just realize that those may not be running through everyone else's head. They may be running through your generation's head, but different generations have different ways that they think and perceive of these things. And last week we learned from the Bible story of Rehoboam that there are even biblical examples from a long time ago where generations struggled to work together. And I told you that throughout the next several weeks, I'd love to be your tour guide on a travel into the different worlds of the different generations. Just like when you go to a foreign culture and you want to observe that foreign culture and learn more about it, it's really nice whenever you can take a tour guide along with you who can help you to see the customs, to be your interpreter, and to show you the lay of the land. My plan is over the next several weeks to be your tour guide, to see the wonderful sights in the land of the boomers, to see the thoughts and the experiences of Generation X, to hear about those crazy millennials that we always see written about in the news, and to learn about our uncharted territory, Generation Z. But before we can get to any of that, today we have to start with that first generation, the traditionalists, because nothing makes sense that comes next if we don't first get a context of that greatest generation. So tonight, as we go through our panel, I would love to invite you to listen with me. Every time I do this, as the panel director, I learn something new. And I don't expect that will change throughout this workshop. So we all can go on the journey and learn together. Our panel tonight is a little different from last week. Last week we had a lot of fun with a trivia game. This week we want to really intently listen because we will be hearing stories and understanding things in new light. So if I could, I would love to ask my panelists if you're willing to make your way down to the front and go ahead and find a seat. If my 2 Gen Z young people will sit together, and then my other group, if you will come and sit in the other 3 seats for me, if you're in the traditionalist group. Thank you so much. I can tell this is going to be a good group. I can already tell. I can just tell by looking. All right. Do you all mind to, since I'm new to you, to introduce yourselves? If you'll, each group, maybe the traditionalists, if y'all will grab a microphone, young people, if y'all will grab this microphone, and just start here and introduce. Tell me your name, and that's all you got to do. Just tell me your name. Yeah, it's fine either way, first or last, it's fine.
Lydia.
Okay, Lydia.
Carson May.
Okay, Lydia Carson.
Jimmy Reisner.
Jimmy, is that right? Jimmy. Okay.
Willie Mae Jackson.
Okay.
Dot Willis.
Dot and Rulie Mae. Willie Mae. Willie Mae. Okay. All right. No, you did good. You did good. That's funny. That's great. All right. All right. I want to start. I'm gonna start with you, young people. So I got Lydia and Carson, right? Okay. Lydia and Carson. I want to start with you. Either one of you can begin here. Do you know what a stereotype is? Use the microphone if you don't mind, so everybody can hear you. And in addition to that, what are some stereotypes that older people have?
Okay, a stereotype is like when you group someone and like make judgments about them just by their appearance, like something they own.
Good, very good.
And so an example could be like, I guess like motorcycle people, typically like you'd be like, oh yeah, that's a person with a lot of tattoos, maybe piercings, long hair.
Yeah, good. That is a stereotype. So what then would you say that older people, what kind of stereotypes do you hear, maybe not that you have, but you hear other people say about older people?
Wait, say about older people?
Yes, older folks. If y'all don't be scared of the microphone, they'll adjust it up there. Yeah.
A lot of times I just hear people call them boomers.
Boomers?
It's like, okay, boomer. Sorry, y'all.
Okay, all right.
The younger people probably get that.
Okay, all right. Carson, what stereotypes do you hear about older people?
That we make about them?
Yeah.
Like, they don't know about technology.
Okay.
Like, they don't know how to turn on the TV or how to work a smartphone or something like that.
Yeah, okay, good, all right. All right, so let me ask the traditionalists, what are some stereotypes you think other people have about older people?
Like Carson said, we don't know how to use iPhones. We don't know how to use technology. It was created during our period, but they catch up on it a lot quicker, and we resist learning about it. Technology is just one of them, but we're old and set in our ways. We got some silly ideas on what they should be doing or what's right and wrong. It was passed down to us, and we just passed it along to them.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Think about old people.
I think probably young people think that those of us that are older see things more in black and white than in colors or yeah. And it's we're a little bit more opinionated and we're a lot smarter.
Now, is that what people think, or is that what's true? Is that okay? All right. Dot, what stereotypes do you think older folks have?
Well, I think because you get 90 years old that you're not able to do anything, keep up with the younger ones. You know, we ought to sit on the bench and do anything.
I hope you're listening. This is an honest answer. Yeah, thank you, Doc.
One thing what Willie Mae said about we see things more black and white, and this young group has just tore the devil out of the gray area. They stretch things a little bit and make it, well, that's not quite so bad because this, they justify doing things. And our way we was raised, right or wrong.
Gotcha. Let me ask you guys a question about the Great Depression. Okay. First of all, have you heard of the Great Depression? Okay. Good. That's good. All right. Tell me, Lydia and Carson, what do you know about the Great Depression?
Well, it started because it was about the stock market crashing. And then everybody tried to go get money out of the banks. Then the banks closed and everybody lost their money, didn't have anything.
Yeah, hold your mics up close to you. Yeah.
The stock market crash, and like everybody tried to go to the banks and pull out their money, and then the banks closed and they didn't have anything.
Roosevelt got us out of it for the most part, and a lot of the problem too was like there was so much overproduction of like everything because things were so good in the 20s, and then everyone just kind of overproducing, then they couldn't sell it, and then America was also trying to be like isolationist during the time, and so that kind of like stopped them from being able to get rid of stuff, and then people weren't raising wages and different things, and so then everyone just kind of like.
Okay, traditionalists, when I say Great Depression, what are your earliest memories of the Depression era?
I was born after in 48,
Sure.
but my mom and dad was born in 19 and 13. They lived through it. They was able to tell me firsthand. Like Dot and Willie Mae, they heard it from their parents, and come to find out it wasn't. It was bad, but it wasn't so bad because everybody was in the same shape. Nobody had it any better than anybody else. They all lived through it and just done what they had to do.
What do you remember about what happened in what are your earliest memories of Depression times?
Of course, I was born in 1939, and that was right around World War II. So a lot of my memories are about the war.
Right.
I remember my mom telling me, she made all of our clothes, and we were pretty self-sufficient because I was raised on a farm. We had cows, we had pigs, we raised all of our crops. We didn't go hungry, that's for sure. So, and we really probably ate organic the whole time. So, that's why we're in as good a shape as we are. But the World War II really made a big impression on me, more so than the Great Depression. Of course, it did my parents.
Sure. And I want to come back to that. But I bet Dot remembers Depression times. Tell us about it, Dot.
I was born that year.
Okay.
I was in 29, so it was right around. And like Willie Mae said, we had plenty to eat, and my mother made our dresses out of flour sacks, and the peddler would come by and we'd buy our groceries off of the peddler. The kids that don't know what a peddler is, he's a guy that back where I was raised, they were working on the road, so he had to use a covered wagon to bring stuff. And he would come by, and we would take eggs and trade them for candy or something that we wanted. But my daddy was farming for his daddy at the time, but he went to work. That was when Miss Roosevelt come up with WPA, and he went to work for WPA, and he worked there for some time. Then he was CBA. So we had it good. We really did. We had plenty to eat and clothes to wear. When we go to school, first grade, our teacher said we looked like Shirley Temple dolls.
Let me move to the war then now. Tell me a little bit, what do you think our most important lessons were from World War II, from your perspective, you three?
Now, say that again.
What do you think our greatest lessons were that we learned from World War II?
To be alert, to really look at the situation as it is and not what you want it to be. I was so impressed with some people who really knew that World War II was coming, and other people wanted to deny it. So you really have to stay alert with what's going on in other countries, a lot more than, of course, back then they didn't have a lot of communication, but today we certainly do, and you just have to keep your eyes open because things can happen awfully quickly. What do you want me to tell you?
What about personal memories of
Personal
the war?
memories?
Yeah, what? Tell
Okay.
me about you. How did the war affect you and your families?
Oh, I was frightened. I can remember as a small child being very frightened of airplanes. I had this fear of airplanes, and if it was mealtime and a plane came over, I couldn't eat. Yeah, I had two brothers in the war, and of course, trying to keep track of them. One brother was stationed in England, and the other one went through the fighting at Guadalcanal. So we had lots of issues with that and worries. So even as a child, I had it.
Any memories of the war, Dot?
That's the same as she did. I had a cousin that got killed, and it wasn't at Pearl Harbor.
Hold it up real close to your
It
mouth.
wasn't at Pearl Harbor, but it was his ship went into an iceberg. Well, he collided with another ship, really, and he got killed. And then I had an uncle that was in the war. My husband was also in the Navy. He didn't have to be in any war zone or anything. And, yeah, I remember us being, really upset about, hearing things on the radio. Yeah. And, but I can remember when the war was over, we all was at home, of course, and heard it, got in our cars, went downtown, celebrated, everybody was downtown in the streets hollering and, celebrating. It was a happy time then. Other than that, I had my mind on other things, I guess.
Let's come back to the young people. Do either of you live on a farm? Have either of you ever lived on a farm? What about the three of you? Any of you ever lived on a farm? Okay. Tell us about what are your memories of being raised on the farm? What are your fondest memories of farm living?
What? Oh, yeah. Well, he said start with an outhouse. Of course, we all know what them are. And I can, I vividly
If you don't mind, hold the mic real close.
remember, things, but because I was just real little, hadn't started school at that time. But my mother cooked on a wood stove, and of course that heated up the kitchen, and that's where we stayed. The biggest part of the time was in the kitchen, and we would, sister and me would get behind the stove and cut out paper dolls from the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and that's what our toys was. And, I remember the chicken, killing the chickens, wringing their heads off. I didn't do it, but I remember my mother doing it, and making lye soap and cracklings, and just. Oh, yeah, she did that too. We was right behind her and at her feet. Women didn't work in her days, of course, outside the home, and I didn't either much. But anyway.
Did either of you have any other stories you'd tell about the farm life?
Hog killing time is a time to avoid. We never had Thanksgiving as such. Of course, I was raised in the mountains of North Carolina, but I can remember getting off the bus and you could smell the. We just knew that it was bad news because it was hog killing times, and we were assigned to feed the pigs, so they were our pets, kind of. And we would always have a fit when somebody had to come and kill them. They usually shot them, and then when you had to see what happened to them, it was very traumatic.
One thing we experienced that this generation is not experiencing is that we didn't have TV. We didn't have cell phones to talk to anybody. If you have lucky enough to have an 8-party line, you got to talk to somebody, but there's always somebody listening in. like Dot was talking about, the old wash pot that sat out in the backyard of everybody was used for a lot of things. You heat up water to duck your chickens in so you could pluck their feathers, kill hogs, make lye soap, wash your clothes. And that was a lot of stuff that we just was expected to do. And you think about kids nowadays and what they have at their fingertips, and I don't guess we knew it was bad times, but now it's nice to be able to think of something on just look it up on your phone, like World War II, and you can find out all about it. Back then, everybody, if your parents was able to, bought encyclopedias. And most of us that's our age have 3 or 4 sets of encyclopedias that is entirely worthless.
Goes out of date the next day, right? Young folks, any observations after anything you want to say after you've listened to them kind of talk about their growing up? Anything you would say after you've heard that? Don't have to, just opportunity. Just want to give you the opportunity.
When I think of the good old days, that's what I think of. Them just telling stories about, oh, they used to live on a farm in World War II and all. I think that stuff is cool because I've never experienced that, so I think it's neat.
Lydia, anything from you?
Same here, and like the paper dolls thing, I used to do that with my great grandma, and so like kind of just like I don't know.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Make sure after yes, that's fine. Make sure you let them know how much we appreciate it. As we think about and listen to these stories, I think our listening helps us to learn some very important things. I wanted to point out to begin, did you notice when I asked about the Great Depression with our Gen Z students, how their mind went to textbook facts about the circumstances that surrounded it? But when I asked our traditionalist friends, it was not the textbook facts, it was the experiences of their home life and their family life. And there's a generational scholar who has coined this lived experience versus learned experience. And this is an incredibly important aspect of understanding different generations. So I want us to go ahead and explore that for a moment. My favorite way to illustrate this concept is to talk about shelling peas with my grandmother. Did any of you ever shell peas with your grandmother? It's wonderful in the South. It seems about, somebody said not by choice. That's funny. I have a very different memory because I've lost my grandmother. And I would go back and shell peas with my grandmother for anything again. You know, and I love this story in the South where we can share this story because it seems to be a shared experience where my grandmother would take me up into her lap, and she'd get a big metal bowl, and she would take and I remember this from my youngest. I mean, I remember being 2-3 years old, and she'd take my little bitty thumb, and she would just run it down that pea and just teach me things and talk to me while we sat and shelled peas. Well, if I were to ask you, how do you shell peas? You could type that into Google, and within 15 seconds, you would have a step-by-step direction on how to shell peas. So I have a question for you. Is that the same thing as what I experienced with my grandmother? It's not. It's the difference between a lived experience and a learned experience. And for us to understand generational differences, we have to start there. The things that we live have a profound and deep effect on who we are. I want to point something else out about the panel. When our traditionalist friends were talking about having dresses sewn from paper sacks, they said, we lacked for nothing. Did you hear that? We were happy. We didn't ever worry about anything. I want that to sink in with you and with us, that that's different than the culture of today. Okay? So why do our traditionalist friends tend to be conservative, thrifty? Why do they believe so strongly in their country and their duty to their country? Why are they such hard workers? Well, a lot of these things are products of their time and who they are. I still, when I would go to my great-grandmother's house, why did she wash the paper cups in the dishwasher? You know, when I was little, it used to drive me nuts that, you know, I would open the dishwasher and there'd be 6 solo cups in there, you know, getting washed. There was no guarantee that they were going to have the $2 to buy the solo cups again next week. And so there are reasons why these experiences shape the generations the way they do. The second concept I want to talk to you about in terms of generational thinking and understanding is generalization versus stereotype. And I loved how our Gen Zers described the concept of a stereotype. I want to talk with you for just a moment about that before we move forward. A generalization is what we're trying to do with this workshop, not a stereotype. And it's very important for us to distinguish between those two things. Not every person who is born within a certain generation will be exactly alike. There are way too many things that distinguish us besides just the time in which we are born. We all understand this concept when it comes to things like race and gender and those kinds of things. So, for instance, if I were to stand up here and say that African Americans are like this, or all women are like this, you would probably be offended by the way I was talking, because you know that there are differences within all different races, genders, and generational lines. So don't assume that everything that we talk about over the next few weeks is a stereotype. That's not our interest. And actually, you could take this workshop and you could use it for evil instead of good, because you find out how we're different, and then you could emphasize those differences. And that's not going to be helpful. So what we're trying to do as we talk about generalizations is we're trying to just make an observation based on a lot of people. Let me give you my easiest way I know to illustrate the difference between a generalization and a stereotype. A generalization is that millennials like tattoos. That's a generalization. You know how I can make that generalization? We've polled millennials, and 40% of millennials have a tattoo. That's higher than any other generation before, okay? Now, the difference between that generalization and a stereotype is if I walked up to Caitlin, who I think was on our panel last week, and I said, "Caitlin, show me your tattoo." You see how there's a difference there? Because we've applied it to a specific person or a specific case. So it's important to know that a generalization is what we're after and not a stereotype. Jesus knew all about stereotypes in the New Testament. In John chapter 4, in verse 9, do you remember what happens with the woman at the well? Do you remember why is she so shocked when Jesus asks for a drink of water? They don't do that, right? Jews don't ask Samaritans for a drink of water. And why is the parable of the Good Samaritan such a surprising story? Because Samaritans aren't expected to be the heroes of those stories. Jesus knew all about stereotypes and was always working to try to work through them and help to bring people together. The third thing I want to talk to you about in terms of helping us lay the groundwork is the difference between a ghost story and an urban legend. All right, let me explain to you what this means. A ghost story is, when I say that, I'm using a term from a guy named Hayden Shaw that describes the things that we grew up with together that have a big impact on who we are. For our traditionalist friends, those are the aftermaths of the Great Depression. And if you've got your little handout, you can look on one side and you'll see that those ghost stories are starred on your handout. Okay? The ones that have the most profound effect. The Great Depression, World War II, and the move from the farm to the city. Those had the most profound effect on traditionalists. And those are, so when I say ghost stories, I'm not talking about scary stories, but I'm talking about the things that have an impact on us and cause us to act differently. A la my great-grandmother washing Solo cups. It has an effect in the present, even though it was from something that happened many, many, many years ago. That's what a ghost story is. I can illustrate it this way. There's a well-known story amongst truckers down where I'm from. I'm from Winfield, Alabama. That's where I was born and raised. And in Marion County. And there's this story about Highway 5 in Walker County. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with this story, but it's a story of a woman who was killed by a trucker on Highway 5 in the small town of Lynn, Alabama. And as the story goes, not long after her death, truckers, as they drove down Highway 5, started seeing her in the window of their cabs as they drove down Highway 5 at night. Needless to say, not a very pleasant experience. So as a result, if you talk to truckers in my area, they do not drive Highway 5 at night. They take Highway 13. It's out of the way, but they are not going to drive Highway 5. And that's the idea, is that it's something that's happened in the past that has an effect on the present. Again, it doesn't have to be a scary story, but that's just the illustration that I'm using right now. Did you know that in the first half of the 1900s, 66% of people in the United States lived on a farm? By 1975, 75% of people lived in the city. That's a massive shift. And our traditionalist friends lived through that shift. They were there when that shift happened and occurred. They lived on farms, and if you live on the farm, you don't do very well if you don't work. If you want milk, there's a cow that has to be tended to. If you need eggs, you have to tend to the chickens. If you want to eat vegetables in the summer, what do you have to do? You have to plant them in the spring, right? So if you wanted to survive or to live or to thrive, you had to learn how to work. And that's why you'll notice on your handout that our traditionalist friends place hard work and work ethic at the top of their list of things that they feel represent their generation. Traditionalists learned how to be adults at very young ages. In fact, I'll describe this next week when we talk about boomers, but boomers invented the idea of being a teenager. You know that? Traditionalists, what were they doing at the ages of 11 and 12? Were they out hanging out on street corners and, they were working on the farm. By that age, they had already carved out a niche in the way that they could help the family, and they were already being producers in their families. And they would coincidentally marry very young as well. So several traditionalist friends could tell you about their marriages that happened before they were 20 years old. Very different from our culture today. They really didn't have that in-between period. Life on the farm made it difficult to get away with things like taking drugs and committing major crimes and being sexually promiscuous. Those things still happened, but it was a different world in which they grew up in those days. So finally, I want to make sure that we acknowledge and appreciate our traditionalist friends. The Bible has a lot to say about our friends who are from this group. Proverbs 20:29 says, "The glory of young men is their strength, but the honor of old men is their gray hair." Proverbs 16:31 says, "A gray head is a crown of glory. It's found in the way of righteousness." Job 12:12 says, "Wisdom is with aged men, with long life is understanding." Deuteronomy 32:7 says, "Remember the days of old, consider the years of all generations. Ask your father, and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you." And one of the best ways, I appreciate Dot so much for what she said, because one of the best ways we can remember our traditionalist friends is to remember not to forget about them. Did you hear what she said when she said people think that we're just to be put on a shelf, basically? And I appreciated that honesty, because when I do these workshops, a lot of folks in that oldest generation feel like they have been relegated to the bench. And our traditionalist friends have so much to add to our lives and to our churches. And we need to remember to pray for them. Not just to involve them, but to pray for them. There are several places in Scripture, Psalm 71, Isaiah 46, that talk about this particular concept. But as I close, I want to share with you a story with my son's now 6 years old, but I want to share with you a story from my 5-year-old as we close our thoughts together, and we'll head into the boomer country next week. So you'll want to put your seatbelts on for that. Okay? Every night before we go to bed, I pray with my 5-year-old, now 6-year-old. And there are nights when he doesn't want to pray, surprisingly, where, we'll rotate back and forth, and he just doesn't feel like praying. And he's stubborn, I'm more stubborn. So I can outlast his obstacles. He's so scared. I love that you thought about us and made the grown-ups. And I love the grown-ups so much. And that's my final prayer for us tonight. Thank you, God, for making the greatest generation. I love that you thought of them and made them. And we love them so much. I hope you have a blessed week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.